Hello everyone and welcome back to CRTV 131 Contemporary American Cinema Class 3, and this is where we really dive in to contemporary American cinema after all the prep work that we've done, reviewing and finding influences. And so now we're going to dive in, and let me make an aside here. We're going to start like 50 years ago. And so it's a little odd to call it contemporary, I guess. I'm not sure we could get a whole 15-week class out of 20 years of films. We probably could. We just have to spend an awful lot of time year by year rather than maybe decade by decade. But going back to 1968, 69, isn't exactly contemporary, so I hope you don't mind. But that's the way most of these contemporary classes go, and basically it makes a certain amount of sense. I guess you could say maybe we want to start the class when CGI comes in or something like that, or green screen or whatever. But most college classes start with the new Hollywood, with the new rating system. And the new way of doing things, the new way of releasing movies, and all that. And we will talk about new business models when we get to Jaws. And today we're going to talk about the ratings system. So it's as good a place to begin a contemporary cinema class as any. But just so you know, there's a little bit of discussion. On the faculty, we discuss these things, and sometimes we wonder, is this really where we want contemporary class to begin? So most people begin it somewhere in the late 60s or perhaps in the early 70s. So we're going to start off with Roger Corman, and he is a director and a producer and a studio head of American International Pictures. And maybe you don't know him, but he is the guy that took a chance and hired Francis Coppola and Martin Scorsese, James Cameron, Ron Howard, Jack Nicholson, Sylvester Stallone, Sandra Bullock. And a lot of people consider it sort of like grad school. They went to film school, they learned how to do stuff, and now you have an actual budget, you're shooting on actual locations, you don't have the safety of being a film student shooting on campus or whatever. And so a lot of directors thought, wow, this is the real thing. There's a real budget, there's a real schedules and things and releases, and they're playing in real theaters, and all my friends can actually go see these movies. They probably have to go to the drive-in to see these movies, but a number of directors, they really called it or referred to it, working at AIP with Roger Corman, as kind of like grad school, right? The finishing up before you hit the major leagues of the studios and so on, and get into the studio system and everything. You need to learn how to work with a schedule and with a budget, and not just a grade. So he really provided valuable help for all of these young film directors and actors and actresses and so on. And Corman was a director himself and a producer. He directed, 50 or more movies himself, and produced, I think, 400 films. And he's a real legend. And I think he's still with us. He's in his 90s. I'm pretty sure he's still with us. I hate to guess on that, but I'm pretty sure he's still with us. I know we lose some of our legends. They get into their 90s, like Stan Lee and people like that. Mel Brooks is still with us. He's in his 90s. So I really hate to guess on that, but I'm pretty sure that Roger Corman is still with us. And when that day comes, it will be probably front page news. It will probably be front page news, depending on what's going on that day. But in the local papers and everything, he's a pretty important person. Anyway, dear old Roger, thank you for grad school for all these wonderful actors and actresses. And I have linked to a wonderful documentary called A Decade Under the Influence. It's sort of like Driving Under the Influence, I guess. A Decade Under the Influence. It's a great multi-part documentary. I think you can find the rest of it. The clip I have is the first 15 minutes of it. And depending on the class and depending on the semester, I love to show it because it has lots of interviews with people like Roger Corman and Dennis Hopper and all those people, and they're talking about the early days and making movies and the new Hollywood, and Martin Scorsese's in it. Lots and lots of people are in it, and it's a good documentary. So I've linked to the first one, the first part, first 15 minutes, I guess, and they're going to talk about influences and so on, and they're going to reference Kurosawa and Fellini. That's partly why I wanted to show you all a little bit of those directors, and they're going to talk about Antonioni. So in that documentary, when they start talking about all that stuff, you're going to at least have a passing knowledge of who these people are and what those movies are and so on. So we're going to look at some transition films, maybe 3 or 4 transition films, and I call them transition films because they came out before the very important ratings system came in. And so up until then, movies that wanted to maybe use a raw language, violence in many cases, like Bonnie and Clyde, and sexuality or nudity, were really pushing the envelope because it really depended on the theater. Some theaters, and I've mentioned this before, in bigger cities and sometimes near college campuses and places like that, would take a chance because they thought maybe they could make some money, right? It's really a business, no matter what. And they thought maybe they could make some money on it. But once the rating system came in, then R-rated movies were out there. They were out in the marketplace. Some of them became very popular. You really couldn't ignore The Godfather, for goodness sakes. Everybody went to see The Godfather, 1972, a few years in. And it made lots and lots of money, broke the records, actually. And so this is all pretty new, right? These films here, Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate and Easy Rider, they're pretty new, and it's a little. I remember seeing these movies in theaters and so on, and it's a little shocking. I was like, did you hear? Did they say the F-bomb? Did they say? I remember when I saw MASH in 1970, and my friend and I, we couldn't believe that they dropped the F-bomb. It was really, we were kind of giddy. We were laughing like, oh my God, did you hear that? They actually said it in the movie. So these movies here, Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, they're before that, just barely. And so that momentous occasion of the rating system is the very end of 1968. The very end of 1968, November, I think it is. And at that point, then movie makers are making more of a business decision. Do you mind if you exclude anybody under 17 from seeing your movie? And if you don't mind that people under 17 can't get in to see your movie, then you can make it R-rated. Not a big deal, right? It's a business decision as much as anything else. It still is today, but they were really getting used to it back then. So anyway, here comes Bonnie and Clyde. It would be an R-rated movie. Sexuality, violence, and all of that. But this is before the ratings system, which is what makes it transitional. And the star and producer, Warren Beatty, there he is as Clyde. He is a good-looking guy. You can tell he's a very handsome, good-looking guy, and he didn't want to just keep playing the romantic male lead, you know, the boy toy, right? He didn't want to just be in all these romantic movies and be known for being really good-looking and all of that. And a lot of women too, of course. Faye Dunaway, right there next to him, of course. She didn't want to just be known for her beauty either. So anyway, Warren took the initiative, and he wanted to start producing. He found this script here and worked with some people on the script. He wanted it to be like a French New Wave movie, sort of like Breathless. That's another reason why I wanted to show you Breathless, because we're going to refer back to all of that. And so he wanted to be, kind of new and cutting edge and all of that. And it definitely was. So the studio, they really didn't get it. They are thinking drive-in, right? It's a drive-in movie. It's bank robbers. It's a drive-in movie, like they've always been throughout all the years. And there were other movies about John Dillinger and so on over the 60s and 50s and so on. And they were, low budget B movie, drive-in movies. And the studio, they thought it was just more of the same. And Beatty really thought he had more on his hands. He really thought he had a better picture than just a drive-in movie. And he was upset at the release schedule, right? Lots of drive-ins in the summer. And he pestered the studio execs. I think it was Jack Warner at Warner Brothers. And he'd been around since the 30s. So here are these people that are running the studios. And they make a little bit of reference to that in a Decade Under the Influence, if you've watched that by now. And they'd been around for these 30, 40 years. 30 years, I guess it was. And they're not the young, hungry studio heads anymore. They're not parents, they're grandparents. And, grandparents don't always have their finger on the pulse of a younger audience. And so, just as you'd expect, Jack Warner, he thought it was a drive-in movie, and a lot of these guys were like grandparents, a little old-fashioned and so on, and don't like all that sex and don't like all that violence, and movies should be clean cut and all that. Now Jack Warner, they were part of Warner Brothers. They're the ones that put out Scarface and Little Caesar. Actually, they didn't put out Scarface. They put out Little Caesar and Public Enemy. So he'd been putting out gangster movies and so on, but when he was a young guy back in the 1930s. Now it's these years later, and he wants to be established and respected and all the whole rest of it and stay away from this trashy sort of stuff. But Beatty was very persistent, and there was an influential critic. And her name was Pauline Kael, Kael, if you want to look her up. Very, very influential film critic. Like Roger Ebert, there were a few others that wrote for major publications like the New Yorker or the New York Times or the LA Times. Today, you don't tend to have solo, famous, influential film critics. It's more of sort of an aggregation of, Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes, where you're just one of 100 critics weighing in, and your rating is sort of all averaged in together. That's really what Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic are, right? It's just dozens and dozens and dozens of critics, and they take the average of their review, and that's how you get a score. But in the past, in the 60s, and even earlier, and certainly in the 60s and 70s, then some critics could really make or break a movie. And Pauline Kael was very influential, and she gave the film, I think Beatty arranged somehow for her to see it, and she gave the film a rave review. This is the new Hollywood. This is a landmark film and all that. She was very effusive, and Beatty took her review to Jack Warner and said, "See, it's not a drive-in movie." And so finally, they released it in some nice theaters in the fall, and it got 8 Oscar nominations. Okay, that's pretty good for a drive-in movie. Yeah, 8 Oscar nominations. It won a couple, but it really showed Hollywood that there is a new way, right? There's a new Hollywood. There's a new way. There's a new kind of movie that can make money, and so the race was on. Now, Bonnie and Clyde, it's a fun film. It is. It's known for being, pushing the envelope with sex and with violence. And this film, and I've linked to another one later called The Wild Bunch in particular, where some of the shootouts and so on, is done in slow motion. And a lot of people thought that this slow motion really made death and violence beautiful, balletic, okay, like a ballet and falling in slow motion and all that. And so there was a lot of controversy about how violence was treated in these movies. And so I have linked to the rather famous shootout at the end of Bonnie and Clyde. In the meantime, there's Bonnie, and she's not bad looking. You put some modern day makeup on her and so on. She was nice looking lady, and Clyde too, right? He's he looks okay. He's not quite Warren Beatty, but they look good, and she loved to send pictures and poetry to the newspapers. And you can just imagine her today, right? You can just imagine her today on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, right? She loved social media, basically, the newspaper. She would have been all over that stuff if she were today, posing for pictures and all that kind of thing, and robbing banks and shootouts. And there she is, very cheekily, with a cigar in her mouth there, and a gun. And so on, and pictures like this, I've got Clyde, and all that. Actually, even in the movie, their style, right? Bonnie wore a beret, and so we can see. I'm switching back and forth here, but there's Bonnie, right? She wore a beret, and so they had Faye Dunaway wear one, and that became kind of a fashion thing for a little while in ladies' fashion and so on. Of course, this is all tailored and quite nice, and hats and so on, right? So that became a little bit of a fashion thing in 1967. And movies have always done that sort of thing. What people in the audience see their movie stars wearing, it's like, oh, look at Clark Gable, look what he's wearing, and oh, look what Marilyn Monroe's wearing, and all of that. So, and later on, we're going to get up to Annie Hall and Diane Keaton wearing slacks and a tie, so on, in men's clothing. That was also popular for a while. A few years later, up in the 1970s. And so that famous shootout, the car probably was stolen. I don't know who actually owned the car, but somehow the sheriff's department got the car after they cleared out the bodies, and showed it, right? At first, hey, look, there's the car, and then they started charging whatever, a nickel or a quarter or something like that. Remember, it's the Depression when Bonnie and Clyde took place, 34, 35, something like that. And bank robbers back then were seen as kind of not exactly like Robin Hoods. They didn't always disperse the money to other people that maybe needed it, but a lot of people were pretty upset with banks, and so I've linked to a scene, I think I have, where they meet, and they are hiding out in an emptied farmhouse, and the farmer comes back for a last look at his house because the bank took it, and Bonnie and Clyde gives him his gun, and he says, shoot it up, right? So they shoot at the house, and so they were kind of seen as kind of like Robin Hoods, I guess. And banks were the bad guys, right? Because they were foreclosing on farms. There was the Dust Bowl and that sort of thing down there in Texas and Oklahoma. Other people lost their jobs in factories and so on, and the banks would say, if you can't pay your mortgage, then we're going to repossess your car, repossess your house, and that sort of thing. So what was going on with Bonnie and Clyde in the movie and in real life in the 1930s, and in the movie in the 1960s, it really tied in, right? It tied into this whole rebellion, anti-establishment, anti-authority, and all of that. It felt contemporary, even though it was set 30 plus years in the past. So I think that's part of the reason why it was a hit. And a very good movie too. So, but that felt contemporary. Next up, we have The Graduate, also from 1967. This is from director Mike Nichols. Not thought of as a drive-in movie. It was thought of as a regular studio-type movie. It was very, very popular. It just hit all the right chords. It was contemporary enough for a new audience, but not too raunchy for older people. It was R-rated, but not hard R or anything like that. Or it would have been. It would have been. This is before the ratings code, but it probably would have been lots of sex and so on in it. So it probably would have been R-rated. Like I said, this is before the rating system. And was very, very popular. And I was kind of surprised when I was looking at the top grossing movies of all time when adjusted for inflation that The Graduate was in the top 10 or top 20. So over the years, it has worked out pretty well and adjusted for inflation and all the whole rest of it. There's Benjamin, young Benjamin, played by Dustin Hoffman, and it is kind of a transitional film. He is a college graduate. He doesn't have very long hair. He doesn't smoke pot. We never hear anything about the war in Vietnam. So in that regard, it's sort of ignoring the present day. But it does have a real feel. It does have an anti-authority sort of a feel, just like Bonnie and Clyde. And Benjamin is going to have an affair with one of his parents' friends. So she's old enough to be his mother. In real life, Dustin Hoffman was in his late 20s, and Anne Bancroft, Mrs. Mel Brooks, was in her, I think, late 30s or early 40s. So they are only maybe 11 or 12 years apart in real life, IRL. But anyway, he's a college graduate of 2021. She's supposed to be in her 40s, and the original, I don't know, Panther Woman, I guess. So Ben is searching for a life of meaning. He's had a very nice life. They look like they have a pool in the 1960s. I don't know if it's Beverly Hills, but you know, that's a pretty good existence. And he went to school back east, an Ivy League school, unnamed, back east. And he doesn't want that kind of a life, right? He doesn't want to just have another big house in the suburbs and all that sort of thing. He's looking for the meaning of life, okay, as are a lot of college graduates, I guess you could say. And this little guy, this is an aquarium here in his room, in his bedroom. This is going to come back too, because Ben is going to get a gift of a scuba suit. It's a very funny scene, and I don't think I've linked to it, but you can feel free to look for it. It's very funny. In the film, all of the adults, it says parents, but all of the adults in the movie are Mr. or Mrs. Okay, Mr. Braddock, Mr. whatever, Mrs. Robinson, and the kids are all first name, Ben and Elaine, and that's on purpose. So maybe you might notice that. There's also lots of glass in the movie, whether it's an aquarium, whether it's a scuba mask, whether it's sliding glass doors, whether it's a telephone booth, whether it's the glass doors at the church. There's lots of glass. It's sort of a barrier. It's kind of a theme running through the movie. So if you decide to watch the movie, keep track of how many scenes have glass of some sort. There are some words in the movie that are quite fun, and they probably meant more back then. So I want to explain some of this stuff. At one point in a scene at Ben's graduation party at his parents' house, and all of the people at his graduation party are his parents' friends. I don't think any of his friends are there. They're all his parents' friends at his graduation party. And one of the men, I don't know, with a cigar or something, and he puts his arm around Ben and, come out by the pool and everything. He says, "I have just one word for you, one word, plastic." And that meant something. Plastic as then artificial, not real, somehow fake, faux, okay? It's not, it's not like, I don't know, cotton or whatever, or wood, or, real stuff. It's a manufactured thing. It's a bunch of chemicals. And so that all had meaning when he says plastic. Most people in the audience sort of got what that meant. And now if you see the film, you will get what it means. Ben doesn't want to be a sellout. And that's another term you might not be familiar with. It doesn't mean all the tickets are gone or anything like that. A sellout is someone who is going to do something, often a job, for just the money. Okay, so maybe you get a job in something that you really don't believe in. Let's say there's a job for you at the tobacco company, and you really think tobacco is not a good thing. Maybe you know somebody who has died from lung cancer. You are against smoking, but it's a pretty good job, and you just got out of college, and you'd really like to be making some money. And so, are you going to be a sellout? Okay, as maybe your friends would call you. Oh, he's just a sellout. Okay, and it could be really anything. Maybe you're working for the government or the military or the Pentagon or the Rifle Association or who knows what, right? But that was the term, right? Nobody wanted to be a sellout, right? Do it just for the money. Now it's a tough call because in the real world, it sure would be nice to move out of your parents' home and out of your bedroom and be able to pay rent at your own place and buy your own car and buy your own things and take care of yourself. So that would all be very nice. It's great not being a sellout as long as you can live at your parents' place. But at a certain point, when you start looking for jobs and you're being offered jobs that aren't exactly where you are, whether spiritually or on the political spectrum or whatever, then you have to start thinking, gee, the money would be kind of nice, and am I selling myself? Am I selling my soul for a paycheck? Right? So that those thoughts are still relevant. So that infamous rating system, November 1968, and this replaces the production code. So it's 34 years later. The rating system has been around for much longer now, 56 years, right? 56 years it's been around. So it replaces the Hays Code or the production code. And again, right, both times it is self-censorship. This is the studios feeling the heat of the public, feeling the heat of churches and things, and letters to the editor and that sort of thing, and thinking, well, if we don't do something about these movies, like The Graduate and like Bonnie and Clyde and like Blow Up and Breathless and all these movies coming from America and from Europe, then they're going to do it for us. And if they do it for us, they're going to mess it all up. So we better figure something out. They figured out this new way, right? This rating system that is going to be age-based. And it works out pretty well. Let me, before we get to Indiana Jones, it goes through a number of iterations. It starts off GMRX, okay, M for mature, G for general, and people didn't understand M and R, which is worse, M or R. So they changed it to GP, and then they changed it to PG. So it took them a little while. And X started at 16, and then it went up to 17. And so they were tinkering over the years. And they more or less had it for a while until we get into the 1980s. And movies like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or Gremlins started really pushing that, because jumping from PG to R, see, PG to R, there was no PG-13 yet. It was G for all that wonderful Disney stuff, and then PG, and then it jumped all the way up to R. And so movies like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, he's got a beating heart in his hand. Pa-pump, pa-pump, pa-pump. Okay, this shaman. Yeah, it's a special effect, but you know what? 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, they don't get that. They don't always get, pretend and everything. 10, 11, sure, but 5, 6, 7, they don't always get it, and they think they're going to see this rock'em sock'em fun movie. The worst thing they think they're going to see is maybe a snake. And now we have things like Beating Hearts, and in Gremlins, yeah, they're little gremlins and they're little doll toy things, animatronics, but they are causing trouble. They're the bad guys. They are getting shoved into microwave ovens and shoved down into garbage disposals and all sorts of stuff, and blood is splattering everywhere. And it's just a little toy thing, but little kids are freaking out and they're crying and all that, mommy, mommy. So parents get upset. They make their feelings known, right? Writing letters to things and editors and Congress people and all that kind of stuff. And so wisely, the ratings board added a midpoint edition of PG-13. And so now going from G to PG, and frankly, I don't know, that it seems like there's not a whole lot of difference between G and PG, but I guess there is. But then it jumps just to 13 before it gets up to R, which is 17. In 1990, NC-17 replaces X, and X was really, it was unrated is what X was. It was just sort of a placeholder. It meant it has no rating. And X, you know, means lots of different stuff. It's Roman numeral 10. In math, it is unknown or variable. In engineering, it's experimental, right? X15, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, X has got lots of, you know, different meanings, and then it started meaning adult, and then it started meaning more and more like hardcore and all that. And so by 1990, lots of newspapers and retail outlets like Walmart wouldn't carry X-rated movies. Now, there are X-rated movies that have won awards and things. We're going to come up to one in just a minute that won lots of awards, but it was sort of co-opted. Now, in Europe, they tend to have more restrictions for violence, and we tend to have more restrictions, age restrictions for sex. You know, lots of shootouts and blood and spurting and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, probably still going to be, you know, PG-13 or something like that, possibly are. But we are afraid of naked people and things like that. So it's a cultural thing, right, versus Europe. And, you know, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, it's all different. The whole world, right? The whole world's different depending on where they do it. China versus Japan, and so on in Asia. So the whole world's different, but specifically with Europe, they put more restrictions on violence, up to like 15, and so on, and we put more restrictions on sex. And I bring that up just to show that, you know, it's a worldwide marketplace, it's international. And so when Americans are making movies and they're trying to market them abroad, then the standards change from here to there to elsewhere, right? What, you know, can we show this movie in England? Well, only 15-year-olds can see it in England. Can we show it in France? Well, you know, 14-year-olds can see it in France. So it's a business decision. It's an artistic decision for the filmmakers. Now back to the X rating. It wasn't trademarked, and it was co-opted by the adult film industry. Okay, there we go. X-rated for Deep Throat. And there was a lot of curiosity. You know, if you wanted to see porn in the 60s, it was difficult to find. It was difficult to find. You know, you couldn't, no videos, no online, no media, no internet, none of that. You know, if you were going to try and find one of those movies, maybe in the back of a cheapo men's magazine, not Playboy, but sort of a cheapo men's magazine, there might be a mailing address to somewhere, maybe in Canada, where you could order an 8mm film. Or if you knew somebody who knew somebody, could get one of these films. And then if there was a bachelor party, they could show some real hardcore porn. But for the vast majority of people, you just couldn't find that stuff. not that very many people wanted to, but people were curious. They'd heard about it. People had talked about it. And now all of a sudden it's playing in theaters right down the street. Right? It's playing right down the street. Deep Throat or The Devil and Miss Jones or, one of those movies. And they made pretty good money for a while until videotape came out in the late 70s. If you wanted to see that stuff, you would go to a movie theater. Now, for a while, it played in kind of, theaters like right downtown, and especially, and we've talked about this before, cities like New York and LA, San Francisco, Chicago, you could find that kind of stuff, just like you could find, striptease shows and all that kind of stuff. And so there would be theaters, right, showing Deep Throat, all these curious middle-class adults in their, the ladies in their fur coats and jewelry and all that, standing in line, waiting to get in to see Deep Throat. And like I say, curiosity. And, once you've seen one or two adult movies, that you start figuring out pretty fast that they're all very, very similar. Some of them tried for art and artistry and things. There was a pretty popular Alice in Wonderland movie and a few other things with nice production values and stuff. But the filmmakers figured out pretty fast that people are wading through story to get to the sex part. And why are we wasting all of our money on sets and scripts and story when all anybody really wants to see are those sex scenes? So the industry changed after a few years. It didn't take very long, 4 or 5 years. It didn't take very long. And like I said, VHS really killed it. But there were chains of adult movie theaters. There was a Mitchell Brothers chain, and there was a Pussycat Theaters chain, and they were around. There was one right in Santa Ana. They were around. One actually right across the street from Santa Ana College was it was either Mitchell Brothers or Pussycat Theater. So yeah, they were around, but very short while. But they did make money. So Midnight Cowboy is an X-rated film, right? And it won the Best Picture Oscar, Best Picture of the whole year. Okay, and we have Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight. Here they are, Dustin Hoffman, Ben from The Graduate. Okay, and Angelina Jolie's father, Jon Voight, and it's set in New York City. I've linked to a scene that he wants to be a male prostitute, but he's this dumb kid. Yeah, he's tall and blonde hair and blue eyes. He's this dumb kid from Texas, and he thinks he's going to get, just like he did in high school, cheerleaders and whatnot. Only they're going to want to, and beautiful women and models and so on, and they're going to want to pay to have sex with him. And he doesn't know that young, pretty, beautiful women aren't going to need to pay for sex, no matter how good looking he is. He's going to get older women, and gay men are the ones that are going to want to pay to have sex with him. And he's not really that interested in that. He's completely delusional, and it's sort of an adult story. He's just barely one level above being a homeless guy. He lives in a real filthy place, and they end up moving in together and that sort of thing. So we've got some sex, we've got drugs, I don't know, violence and all that. And that's all X-rated films were supposed to be back then. Just stuff not for kids. And, have you ever been to a movie theater and it's an R-rated movie, like a Quentin Tarantino movie, and you see a parent and like a 6-year-old, and you're like, what the heck? What kind of a parent are you that, or some horror movie or something? What kind of a parent are you to take your little kid just because you couldn't find a babysitter? Why are you taking that 7-year-old kid in to see that hard R-rated movie? And so, it has to be a parent or adult guardian, right? So parents can, they can bring their kids into our movies. That's what the law says, no matter what kind of a parent you are. And not to cast aspersions on these people, but I'm not really sure that 7 or 8-year-old kids should be watching Pulp Fiction. Anyway, with an X-rated movie, or today NC-17, they can't. No one under 17 is admitted. So no matter how bad a parent you are, and no matter how badly you want to see the movie and you can't find a babysitter, you can't bring your 9-year-old kid in to see an NC-17 rated movie. So in that regard, it actually serves a pretty good purpose. Okay, now if you're a parent and you want your 16-year-old to see one of these movies, okay, I get that. But I have seen on numerous occasions Quentin Tarantino movies, parents and children, not teens, but children. So, okay, so I get that. Now I know today there's the internet, there's cable TV, HBO, all the whole rest of it. And it's hard being a responsible parent, that's for sure. So continuing with our transitional type films, we have Easy Rider, and this is yet another drive-in movie. And there was The Wild Angels. There had been other movies with motorcycle riders and things like that, Roger Corman type movies. But this one was a little bit different, a little bit special. If you can't see that there, a man went looking for America and couldn't find it anywhere. Okay, so it's a sort of spiritual quest, the freedom of the open road, all that wonderful kind of stuff. It was very nicely shot. They got good cinematography, color, beautiful look at America. They are going to ride their motorcycles from Los Angeles to the Mardi Gras, which is in New Orleans, Louisiana, which means they're going to go across Arizona and New Mexico and Texas and Louisiana. So they are going to get into the South, and that's going to be a little bit different, right? Long-ish hair, motorcycles, smoking marijuana by the campfire at night, that sort of thing. And that's not going to play very well once they get into the South. Once they get into Texas and Louisiana, that's not going to play very well. And they are going to, especially in 1969, later on, men in the 70s are going to have longer hair. That doesn't look so bad for the 1970s. But in, 68, 69, he was a long-haired, he wasn't a hippie, right? He wasn't a hippie. He was a motorcycle rider. Hippies were different than all that. But he's going to run into some actual hippies at a commune, and somebody's going to give him some LSD, and he's going to save it for when he gets to the Mardi Gras with his friend. There they are, Dennis Hopper. And what a great motorcycle that is. One of them, they made two, and one of them they had to destroy in the film. So there's one, and its ownership is under dispute. So there are a couple of people that say they have the original Easy Rider motorcycle with the wonderful, the teardrop gas tank and all that. I'm not sure what it's called, extended front, and so on. I think it's illegal now. Interestingly, Easy Rider has become a real brand. Easy Rider. There's Easy Rider. There's an Easy Rider magazine about motorcycles and so on. There's Easy Rider rolling papers and so on. So I guess they didn't trademark it or whatever, but people have referenced Easy Rider and all that, and it has become quite a thing. People understand that right off the bat. The opening song I've linked to, Born to be Wild. I don't think it was written for the film by Steppenwolf. I don't think it was written by the film, but it works out so well for the movie. Fire all of your guns into space, and Born to be Wild. In that song, actually, as a side bit of trivia, that is the first use of the term heavy metal. He sings heavy metal thunder in the song, and I guess some point somebody started calling the song and songs like it hard rock songs heavy metal. So Destined for the Drive-In became a huge hit. Studios had to sit up and take notice. And we got some wonderful scenes, including a wonderful campfire scene with Jack Nicholson, who really became a star. Jack Nicholson had been bumming around Hollywood for 10 or 11 years, since the late 50s. He'd been bumming around Hollywood, trying to get established as an actor. Uh, for Roger Corman, he did some writing. He did some directing. He was thinking he probably would have to become a writer or a director or something like that pretty soon. He was a little older than a lot of the other young guys. He was in his 30s. And if you haven't made it as a star anyway, you can always be a character actor, but if you haven't made it as some kind of a star by your 30s, you're probably not going to. But he made such an impression in that film. He's only on screen for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but he made such an impression, he never looked back. He became a star almost immediately after this film was released, and was nominated for lots and lots of awards. He's won, I think, 3 Oscars, so Jack has done pretty well for himself, and thanks to this film. And so it's sort of a genre movie, motorcycle movie. That was kind of a thing. There were a number of motorcycle movies playing drive-ins out of Roger Corman's studio. And we have another genre movie, and that's a horror movie. But this one has a good budget, right? So this is very similar to Alfred Hitchcock saying, "I'm going to do a horror movie, only I'm Alfred Hitchcock, and I know how to do this right, and I'm going to put all my knowledge and all my skills into making a really good horror movie, slasher movie, Psycho." And William Friedkin, who had won an Oscar, right? He'd won an Oscar for The French Connection, and he'd won a directing Oscar and all that, and he says, "I'm going to make a horror movie. Okay, I'm going to make a horror movie for my next movie. Only I'm going to do it right and get a nice budget and all the whole rest of it. And it will not be a drive-in horror movie. This will be a good A-list movie." And the studio had high hopes for it and him. And it made a boatload of money. And for a while, in the 70s, it seemed that every year the record would be broken. Okay, the record set by The Sound of Music in 1965, and then The Godfather comes out and breaks that record, and then The Exorcist comes out and breaks that record, and then Jaws comes out and breaks that record, and then Star Wars comes out, right? So it seemed like movies had really come back, right? It was a big thing. They were really in the doldrums in the 50s and 60s. And now, every single year there's another big, huge hit blockbuster. And The Exorcist was part of all that. And we'll get to most of those other movies. We're going to get to The Godfather, I think, in either the next class or the one right after that. We'll get to The Godfather, and we'll talk about Star Wars and all that, all the movie and the art, and especially the business side of things. We got to talk about the business side of things. And what a wonderful poster that was that they did. And I have linked to a modern trailer. It's quite nice and pretty scary, and it holds up pretty well. If you are a horror fan, I think you will enjoy it. It's a classic, just like Psycho. And if you haven't figured it out maybe you haven't figured it out by now, but in a couple of classes, you will see that movies that are famous for a good reason. Casablanca's famous for a very, very good reason, and so is The Exorcist and The Godfather and 2001. There's a really good reason those movies are famous, and after you watch a few of them, you're going to see that just because a movie is more than 5 or 10 years old from the last century, pre-2000, doesn't mean it's some old-fashioned, boring movie. Right? There are lots of really, really good movies that came out before 2000, and I hope you agree by the time we're done with this class. This is one of the new ads to the class, The Wild Bunch. I just put this in pretty recently, but it's a really iconic movie, and I guess they were doing some anniversary stuff and so on. I thought, boy, maybe I should squeeze that into the class. 1969, Sam Peckinpah. There is a new ratings system. So there's a new rating system, but wow, this one's like, wow, you said R-rated, but it's really R-rated. Um, so I've linked to a great shootout. It's toward the end of the movie, a wonderful shootout. The battle goes on for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes. I mean, the battle goes on forever. The scene I've linked to is only about 4.5 minutes long. It is nonstop action, lots of slow-mo, lots of slow-mo. It's kind of beautiful. Slow motion, it can make almost anything beautiful. Even dying, even death, even blood spurting out, right? It's something about slow-mo that makes it graceful and beautiful. And this movie uses a lot of it. And little bit from Bonnie and Clyde, but this movie uses quite a bit of it. The Bonnie and Clyde shootout only goes for 20 seconds, 25 seconds, that's it. And it's not really a shootout because Bonnie and Clyde aren't firing back. But in this movie, it is a 4.5 minute ecstasy, orgy of guns and blood and splatter and all that. And you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. Sort of warning here. It's R-rated. It says it's R-rated, and it's very R-rated. But anyway, you'll see what I'm talking about with the whole slow-mo and glorification and all that. And also, we have an X-rated movie, and it's a cartoon. So, there's only so much X-rated you can get. Now, the standard for X-rated has changed a bit. Some of the movies that were rated X-rated at the time, and you know what? I think the Wild Bunch. No, they don't have it on there. I think the Wild Bunch was rated X also. But standards have changed, and these movies would probably be rated R today. I'm not sure. Fritz is pretty raunchy because it's a cartoon, but it's pretty raunchy. And I've linked to it's not a bad scene, really. He's a college student, right? Just like you guys. He's a college student, Fritz. And he's, got a soliloquy about the life and all that. And it's sort of a dreamy sort of a thing. And we see some sex and stuff like that. But it's very funny. It's based on a underground comic by Robert Crumb. He went under R. Crumb, and he did Fritz the Cat, and he did the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, and Keep on Truckin', and all that kind of stuff. And he did cartoons for underground newspapers, as they were called back then, and got bought, turned into a movie by a very good animator, Ralph Bakshi, who also did some really wonderful stuff as well. So the combined talents of Robert Crumb and Ralph Bakshi and Fritz the Cat. And there they are. They're proud of this X rating, right? Because it's kind of weird, like, what animation? But yeah, they're not gonna sneak, bring the kids or anything like that. They don't want any surprises. It's an X-rated movie, and they're gonna put it right in the poster. So, I put that in. It's a good movie, I think. It is a little bit dated. But it's animation. I mean, you can only get so explicit even with animation. But the point is that it's kind of like the 1970s, anything goes, even animated films and so on. Anything goes mentality in the 1970s. And if you put yourself in the audience, and it's like 1969 and The Wild Bunch comes out, or 1971 and Clockwork Orange or something like that, or MASH, those kinds of movies were not around 2 years ago. They weren't around. There weren't any R-rated movies in 1968, right? The code came in November, and that means that the movies that went into production would, they could sort of re-edit them and stuff. So most people didn't start seeing R or X-rated movies until 69 or 70 or 71. It takes a little while to work a movie through the pipeline. And it's a pretty big change. It's almost as big a change really as talkies or something like that. And more of a change than a lot of technologies, really. It's the subject matter. And it's kind of shocking for a lot of people, right? People are in their 40s and 50s, and they love those nice MGM musicals from the 1950s, and they love Casablanca, and they love all that stuff. And all of a sudden, movie theaters are filled with The Graduate and The Godfather and so on, right? And it really is. I can't emphasize that enough. It's day and night, and it's a big change for a lot of people. So there we go. Our first foray into contemporary American cinema after a couple of classes of prepping us for all that. Good movies, like I say, famous movies are famous for a pretty good reason. And when you get a chance to pick a movie for your first paper, that's a good list right there to choose from. And I have linked to all of these movies, so if you haven't been going back and forth and watching these scenes during the lecture, to me that's how it would be in class, is I would talk for a little while and then show you the movie. But if you haven't done that yet, then enjoy Decade Under the Influence and Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate and Easy Rider and all the whole rest of it. And until next time, thank you so much for joining me, and take care.